Linda, thank you so much for being a part of this. We've talked about the incident that occurred in this community and the way it's traumatized so many people. And this is really, the focus of this is really on the nature of trauma. Can you take us through a bit of the history, the moments around the actual event?
I guess probably around 7 o'clock I got a call at the manse, because I live in the community in the manse. And Sandra Fleming said, "Linda, I think you better get up to the ward house. It's on fire." And the first thing I thought of was how awful that would be for Ida and Bill. I assumed that they'd gotten out of the house, but also for the house. I think I've shared with you before that the house in some ways has its own personality, its own history. It was always the beacon of welcome. I mean, already I'm kind of going through this grief around the loss of the house. And then I got up there, and I sat with Christine in the car, and I brought a blanket, and I tried to think of, okay, what's next, and I brought her some food, because she had been there for a while, and some drinks, and just trying to get a sense of where everybody was, and the family was slowly arriving. But there was no Bill and no Ida. Mm-hmm. And Anne's car was there, which was worrisome. Mm-hmm. And then we began calling around hospitals, because Christine and I began to brainstorm. Is their daughter.
Yeah, and also the person you work with.
Yes, yeah. Well, Christine is the church secretary. Yeah. She's been church administrator for how long? I think maybe over 20 years. Right. So we had worked together before. I was here for 6 years. I was ordained here, and I had left for 9, and then had come. Yeah, I'm back, and so thinking about Christine too, and what she's going through. And so we began calling the hospitals, and I called the chaplains, and just to see where they were, because we assumed, well, maybe something's happened, there's a car accident or something. And then, as we were calling, what I began to notice was that police officers were arriving with the biggest guns I have ever seen in Canada. Like, I've seen these kinds of guns in Guatemala and in Mexico, but never in Canada. Like, these were serious guns. Somebody was worried about somebody. And suddenly in my mind is shifting to, I'm the minister, what am I supposed to do? Right. What are my responsibilities? What am I supposed to do? And as this kind of possibility that there's some kind of act of violence that's happened, and I remember Cody and the trouble that was, the troubled conversations that were happening in the community about Cody. He had been living in a car. That was one of the first pastoral kind of concerns somebody brought to me. Cody's living in a car. Cody's not very well. What's going to happen with Cody? And I kind of, made some calls and things. And Bill and Ida had, Ida was concerned about Cody. Ida was afraid of Cody. Mm-hmm. But they're people of hospitality, and they loved him. So they had this insulated cabin on their property, so they told him that he could work there, that he could live there. So that began to percolate in my mind that what has happened with Cody. Right?
So Cody's a grandson.
And so, Anne is his mother. Mm-hmm. So Anne's car was there. Bill and Ida are the grandparents. He's been staying on their property. Something should happen, like the church should be doing something, but I didn't know what to do, right?
Because you didn't know what you're dealing with.
Didn't know what I was dealing with, but it seemed like some major things happening, right? The house is burning down. There's a ton of fire trucks. Right. Ton of police cars. Like, I can't even tell you how many police cars were there. It was like, I've never seen that many police cars gathered. So we're just thinking about these things, and then I hear word that Derek and Margaret, who were close friends of the family, just took that leadership piece on, right, and said, go up to the church. They came to the car, go up to the church. We set things up, and there was coffee and tea down there, and people just began coming from all over the community. It was incredible, actually.
So you get a call, and a fire in a small community is an issue, period, and then it's somebody that everyone knows, period. So far, it's just a house fire. I mean, that's significant, but you're making the church a kind of central place, sandwiches, you can provide support to the people, the firefighters. But the day changes in character. How did the rest of the day go? Did you recognize, or did you get a sense there's something more going on?
We received trickling information, that Mrs. Ward's car was gone, and she wasn't there. Mm-hmm. Right, that's what we heard. Her car was gone, that she wasn't there. Anne's car was there, and that Cody was nowhere to be found on the property. Mm-hmm. So then people, started wondering. But we were kind of, everybody would come in and be asking questions or have different bits of information. So we were just listening to most of the stuff that was going on and not really drawing a lot of conclusions, but still hoping, that they had gone for a drive and that Mr. and Ann was with her, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we also knew that it was not characteristic of Mrs. Ward to stay away that late and not be home.
Okay, so the fire's going at this point, and you're hoping that the general hope is that they're gone for a drive, but as the day progresses and they're not coming back, or there's no word, then concerns escalate. What was that like for you?
Well, as I said, we just kind of,
Just hoping.
yeah, we were still hoping, right? We were hoping that everybody got out, and we're hoping, that we knew they didn't have cell phone and stuff like that, so I figured, well, they must have gone somewhere, but then after a while, it was too late at night for them not to be home, so we knew that something was amiss.
Yeah. Do you remember how you were feeling, Derek, at that moment?
Well, a bit apprehensive, very sort of like very, very concerned, because not only did we were close friends with Christine, but we were also close to the Lords. Yep.
People so the family went down. I think Christine and I came, and Nikita was there, and Christine's brother was there, and just that waiting.
Okay.
Just waiting.
So right now what you have is something's happening. No one's exactly sure what's taking place, but there's a sense in the community that something horrific is occurring.
Yeah.
Right? A couple of people step up and they organize a central place for people to go, but
Yeah.
you still don't know what you're dealing with.
Still don't know what we're dealing with, and how long it will take.
Yeah.
So the idea is
But the things are changing. There's lots of police, there are fire trucks there, more police, with bigger guns than you've ever seen before. So it's all shifting.
Yeah, it's all shifting. And you can't get any information, because of course the police are all being policed, which is their job, which is to say stay away, right? Don't come near this place. And
But that's its own message.
Yes, it is its own message. And then they blocked off all the traffic, right? So the traffic, just talking about what happens to a community, suddenly traffic backs up, both sides. Nobody can get through. So, the whole community begins to become anxious. And word gets out because it's a small community. So what happens downstairs is I'm waiting with everybody, and people are crying and upset, and some people are numb and frozen. And I don't know what I am. Maybe I'm numb and frozen. I don't think I cried it because I didn't really know what was up, but I suspected it was really bad. Just after years of experience. And then, but the cookies came, like there's nothing quite like a cookie, right? People kept coming with cookies, lots and lots of cookies. And anything you want, people would say anything you want, and they really meant it, and so I think in some ways that's what church communities do best too, because it kind of, in the midst of this chaos of not knowing, but knowing there's trauma, that there is this ministry of cookies that is kind of just holding everybody, just holding people. Because people are reacting, family members are reacting all over the place, everybody handles it differently. And so we waited, I think we waited till about midnight, if I recall, and then everybody just went home, and we still know nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Did Christine go home at this point too?
Christine went home at that point
Okay.
too.
And she still didn't know too, right?
We knew before we left the church. Christine's over here too.
So,
Oh, do we know that? Okay, all right,
Okay.
see, there you go.
so at some point that information filters back to you, because again, you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah,
There's this numbness. The church has become the central place.
yeah,
And at some point, the information is delivered that Ida and Bill and
Yeah.
Nan are dead.
yeah,
Pillars of the community.
yeah. And at this point in time, we still don't know that Cody has killed them.
Yeah.
Because there's the fire, they could have just died in the fire, right? But I think, if I recall, one of the pieces of information that came out was that Anne's car was running. I think, was it not? Was her car running? The door was open or something, right? Her purse was still sitting in there, right? So, I don't have the details, right? Because sometimes
but that's it.
there's trauma, right?
Yeah.
And
you talked about being frozen yourself, not being sure what to do.
Yeah.
Relying on a team, a community of people supporting each other. But still, the day wasn't going to start this way, right?
No.
It wasn't going to end this way. It was a different, right? So,
well, and I think there is the whole sense, as a provider of care, that your life will never be the same ever again.
Yeah.
Your
life will never be the same.
No, my life will never be the same again.
Yeah.
Because, the aspect of the ministry to this place will be different. For years it'll be different. People helping people live through the trauma, move through the trauma. But then there's my own personal relationship with Ida, which was very close.
Yeah.
I've known Ida for 20 years, and Ida was a mentor and a matriarch of the community, and I was a brand new baby minister here, right? And Ida taught me, right? She taught me a lot about rural ministry. She taught me any number of things. I remember one time doing pastoral care, I had been called to a family to go see somebody who was dying and I had gone for 3 days, and the fourth day I couldn't go because there were other people who were ill, and of course the person died that day. So then, the family was really, really super upset, and I thought it was going to be like the end of my ministry. And then, without being asked, because she knew it was a crisis in the community, that this was a crisis of ministry, really, for me and for them, that, because ministers had to be supported spiritually by the community. If they don't have faith in them, then they're kind of toast. I didn't know what to do. Nobody knew what to do. I went to go see them. Mm-hmm. And she spent 3 hours with them, explaining what a minister's week looks like, and that what ministers do on an ongoing basis. And, nobody asked her about that. I only found out about that, through somebody else. The family said, well, Ida had come to us, and so you can do her funeral now, you can do her.
They forgive you.
They forgive me, right? But, that's the kind of person Ida was.
What was it like being here? Sunday, the service comes up, you're in church, you're involved in the community. What was it like in the community during the period just immediately after? When people knew it was a homicide, when people knew...
Disbelief that, in our community, this isn't just an event that you only hear on the news elsewhere, right? And for this to have occurred in our community and involving such good people, it was just unbelievable. Mm-hmm. People just couldn't get their heads around that this had occurred, mm-hmm. that this had occurred, and it being a small community as well, right? We're in awe, and they were just devastated that this had happened.
So devastated, shocked, stunned.
Stunned. Yeah. There was some anger in some areas, but people were upset and anger, and expressed a bit of anger that this had occurred. And some people said, why didn't the system take care of that young man years ago when they knew, there was problems, We knew Cody since he was a child, because Christine used to babysit our 2 children, and Cody and his brother and sister as well. So every day we saw them almost every day, right? And they were only a couple years older than my 2 sons, so we knew Cody and knew the whole family. And so when you looked at what had happened and how he slipped through, and it's a tragedy in itself, right? Mm-hmm. And people were really devastated that that had occurred,
mm-hmm.
and that had happened.
Mm-hmm.
It's different when a criminal act occurs, as someone arrives off the street, comes into your home, and breaks in and does something like that sort. But there was signals that some of the professionals probably should have sensed long ago, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe done something that could have prevented this from ever happening.
Mm-hmm. System's not responding. Even Cody's history, there's some issues of violence embedded in him that affect essentially his soul. This is a symposium on trauma and evil, resilience. What would you, to people who listen to this or are involved in trauma, what wisdom could you impart out of this experience? What would you like them to know about trauma and the aftermath of trauma?
Well, as I said, the circumstances concerning this we didn't control. But, we were involved with the aftermath to a certain extent. And it's just being there, to give support. Anger is not something that, you can have when you deal with this situation. You just have to try and get through it the best that you can. Reach out to those who you know are there, who are genuinely have always been there, and try and mend as much of the sadness that you can. There can be just little things that you do, and sometimes it can be big things that you do. But it is just to try and be there, right? And give some support somewhere along the way.
I mean, you can't be a minister or an office administrator working in church and doing bulletins and thinking about prayers and pastoral care and talking about love and the meaning of life and evil and justice. I mean, those are big things we work with in church all the time, right? So there's no way that on a Wednesday and Friday morning when we're dealing with these issues that in some capacity it doesn't come up. And it's a part of us. I mean, it's a deep part of Christine, but it's also a part of me too. Right? It took me a while to understand that. I think we're trained in professional ethics. It's like, here's your professional life. You kind of put the box around that, compartmentalize it, and if you have the appropriate, if you know what you're doing, you have the appropriate distance, right? Professional distance. Well, I've never managed professional distance very well, right? So, I love the people I'm working with. So, maybe it is bad professional practice, but I hurt when they hurt, right? And so...
but maybe that's good professional practice. And what you're talking about is the nature of relationship. Yeah. And that those things get pulverized sometimes.
Yes. Well, and I think it took me a while to just admit that. Yeah. Just to admit that, I don't know if I'm being an incompetent professional or not, but this is how it is, right? I love these people. We're in ministry together. We have this journey together, and this is just how it's going to be. There's huge questions around this, right?
What are the deep spiritual questions?
Deep questions. Look, why? Yeah. Right? And if there is a good God, why? Right? And who deserves what? Right? And how do we forgive, or can we forgive, or should we even forgive? And so those are deeply spiritual, philosophical questions that wound people if they're not dealt with. And so as the person, I would say I'm one of the last professionals left in the area when everybody goes home at 4.
That's right.
So in rural areas. So, people debrief with me sometimes. Not as much as they used to 20 years ago when people had more of a connection with church. So I have their stories too, right? So I have their stories and my stories, and I just need to sort them out. Yeah. Sometimes, right? So I saw you one day and said, "Can I book some time with you?" I don't have to. You be my therapist because you're not my therapist, but I just need to tell this whole story. Yeah. And that was fantastic. That was the best gift in this whole thing that I had gotten, was somebody who's just with a non-judgmental, but asking really hard questions too, gave to me was to just hear the story. So.
What's been helpful for you in the community? What is the community in the aftermath? It's now a little over 2 years since the incident. What's been helpful for you?
Well, I had a number of conversations with at times, and so she said, you should join the choir. I said, when I retire and I got very little else to do, I think I will join the choir. I said, I'll consider doing that. And so I fulfilled that conversation with her.
And that was very good.
So that was one of the things we had to jest about, right? So I was here doing the dusting one day, and I picked up the picture, and I said, yes, I hear you. We drop over, for tea or pick up some eggs and stuff like that, right? My wife spent a considerable amount of time here because I did crafts. And she could say, I'm going over to Ida just to work on some crafts, and I'd be watching the time. It's 12 o'clock. It's 1 o'clock, and you're not home yet. I would call, right? And I'd go over, and I'd have to arrive in the garden and just took the horn a little so it wouldn't wake up Bill. And Ida would come to the window and say she'd be right down. Sometimes it'd be 1:30 in the morning, And Margaret we had to go to work next day, that kind of stuff. So I got to know her quite well.
So we're going to go and look at the property. Their house is a real community center in a sense, right? It became a very important place for people to flow in. It was a center of hospitality. It's not there anymore. How does that change this community, not having that space, not having that beacon?
Well, for some, it was a drastic change because people dropped in, regularly.
Yeah.
I was I would come over occasionally just to, pop in, or sometimes when I was, because I went over a lot of times because she had, before I got my own key, I always had to go to Ida to get a key or something like that, so I was there a lot of times. And then there were people who would just drop in, see Bill's stuff out around the garden and pop in to see if he had anything that they could get, and then negotiate from him, and in his yard sale stuff. So there was a lot of that always going on, right? And so I think that is something that is greatly missed, in the community, for people just popping in to do those things.
Do you kind of have an ongoing conversation with Ida after she died? Could you finish the conversation about joining the choir? Do you still feel connected to them?
To a certain extent, yes, because I was over one day when they were putting away their preserves for the winter, and she had some beans that she gave me, and she said, you should take those and plant them, because I seen how much they grew out in her garden. And I said, yes, I'll do that. And it was only the other day when I was going through something that I found them. Mm-hmm. So I said, well, now, I'll have to plant those down the spring of the year, and plant the beans that you gave me, and I'll plant them in the garden, and I'll have your beans in forever, because I'll keep some every year to regrow it. So there's still that connection will be there. I never had a garden last year, but I'm retired now, so I'll definitely have one this year. And that's one of the things that I will grow with. Some that will be some of the beans that you gave me. Right?
Mm-hmm. This is what I would normally do. She'd normally do the weeding. So it's one of those jobs where you think, oh, why is that happening? It's like, oh yeah, that's what Ida used to do that, right? So
I'm gonna have to come back to do that.
yeah, she was always on top of that.
I'm gonna bring over some. I got some of my flowers. I got to divide up. So when I divide them up, I'll bring them over and stick them in there.
This is St. Paul's United Church, and it's about 150 years old. The congregation has always been a smaller rural congregation. I think the original settlers here were from Antrim, Northern Ireland. And the same families have lived here for a very long time. The congregation, they rotate between 3 churches, and so on a given Sunday there'll be probably about 30 people here. So it's a fairly small church, but they're very lively, and sometimes the choir outnumbers the congregation these days. But and it used to be a farming community, but now it's pretty much a commuting community. So people will work at the airport, or they'll work in town. So there's some farming that happens, but it's very limited, and it's farther east towards the valley.
All right, there's the foundation.
This is the place where
You go, if you ever had a bad day, you just go sit down, and she can make a cup of tea and just talk, right? And it was very nice here. It's this grass here. Ida kept it lovely with gardens, and so you pull up and there'd be this old shaker house with the shakes on it, and then there's always a lovely fire on, and you can just sit there and you were never there alone, because I think every 20 minutes somebody would come by for something, right?
There's 2 more things now that I thought about that you were there for answering questions, and I wanted to add to it. It was called Grand Central Station because everybody stopped here and had a chat, and they'd feel brand new when they went home, right? And the other thing is Judith Thompson here. she welcomed this host. No, she's a
Professor.
professor at the hospital. And she'd come through here and she'd see this host and she'd just say,
When I came the first time 20 years ago, they didn't have, 19 years ago, so they didn't have a flip chart. No, the church had a flip chart. And I like to teach, right, and do stuff, right?
Yeah,
So,
I know.
well, I had a flip chart, I'll go buy one, I guess, and Christine said, well, don't do that, my dad probably has flip charts. So I went to, I said, okay, so I called them, and then I pulled up, and a couple days later, and said, Bill, you got a flip chart? And he said, well, come over around the side. He said, I pulled up my best three. Best three. And the one I chose was actually, you could hardly lift it.
Yeah.
And he said it had come from an armed forces base somewhere that was used during the Second World War. I don't know. It was just this very solid old thing. But that was Bill, right? I mean, he just collected everything. And you know, those stories about Bill are just very famous all over the place. Right? My favorite one that he did was the old woman in the shoe.
oh yes,
Is that still over?
it's still there, but I got it burned. It's in horrible shape.
Okay, 'cause
He built a shoe. My mother used to go to these doll shows or teddy bear shows, or miniature. They have a miniature teddy bear show. So I have them. I found them. Actually, I found them. The boys had put a bunch of stuff in the woodshed down after the fire with a chalkboard, all for this display of a bunch of teddy bears in a classroom.
Oh,
But
wow.
one year, her display was about dolls, and she decided to do the little woman in the shoe. He built that shoe.
Wow.
And all the dolls were in it and all doing their own little thing. Some on the roof, of course, and some climbing up the laces.
it was her, really, right?
Yeah.
The old, because of all the foster kids she had. I always
Yeah.
thought it was such an appropriate symbol.
Yeah.
The woman should, yeah.
An acorn that he turned out on the lake. It's camouflage. And these are thornless roses here.
Oh, look at that acorn. Look at that. Some of them.
We have the,
Wow. I didn't notice that until you showed
it's
it.
got a hole on the other side.
Yeah.
It's a house. It's not a feeder. It's a house.
Wow.
And these are all thornless roses that he planted here, and they're, well, he only planted a couple, then they spread, but every woman that came here to the house, he would come out in the garden before they went home and pick them a bouquet of these little pink roses with not a thorn in them.
They would pick the beans, and then they would put them all over the beds.
To dry.
And they would dry in the summer heat, so they had beans for the whole winter.
Yeah.
And they're beautiful, because they were the Jacob cattle beans.
Right, and that's what Derek was talking about.
Yeah.
He gave some to Margaret.
Oh, that's right.
They had never planted them. So you can make homemade beans with them. The whole lawn was covered in them when I was cleaning up. Because he had jars and jars of beans for the winter. Yeah. Mom and I helped him.
Bill cured himself. He literally did cure himself. He had a heart issue, and then he had a kidney issue.
Well, when he went down there, they did his blood, and they said his kidney had shut down in his liver.
Yeah, I was
Repeated.
called to the hospital, because they didn't expect him to live past
72
3 or 4 days, right? 72 hours, so I went there, and he didn't look well. And then he called his grandson, Peter,
Peter, my son.
and said, Peter, get all the carrots, because Bill had a
This garden was down there.
garden, and get carrots, I want you to make carrot juice for me, just pure carrot juice. And Bill had carrot juice.
He bring it to me twice a day. He said fresh carrot juice.
He went to the hospital.
Really?
Yeah,
He went to the hospital. That was in September of
Yeah.
2014, and in January.
I wouldn't have believed it unless I'd seen it myself. Right? He was a little orange. He was orange, right? Because he'd eaten so many carrots. But he, you know,
Together?
And even the doctors used to say every time he went for his visit or whatever, because he'd have to go every couple of weeks to see the doctor, and he'd say, "You're still with us." He'd say, "Yeah."
But
I'm still there.
he had in one of these buildings. He had Peter told me it was filled to the rafters with popular mechanics. So Bill had a good.
In the time since, what have been some of the things that have been life-giving for the community or helpful for the community in addressing it? I know just in the immediate time, you talked about the Sunday afterward. What was that Sunday like in church?
Well,
so this takes place on Wednesday,
yep.
Sunday.
Sunday there's a service, and I remember saying to the community, because the elders were kind of calling me and stuff, and I said, it's going to be packed. It's going to be packed. And as a minister, it's like, you preach Sunday by Sunday, you think people fall asleep, are they listening? Suddenly, everybody is listening, right? And what do you say?
What do you say?
Well, I mean, Chris, the great thing that was,
So it was packed.
it was packed. That church was packed. It was down in Myers Grant.
Okay.